To understand how far a man can fall, you first have to look at the heights around him. This is ancient Baghdad, a city defined by towering colonnades, massive trade routes, and immense historical wealth. But amidst that staggering prosperity lived a man who had lost it all. Once a citizen of immense wealth, his fortune had evaporated, leaving him completely ruined. Now he survived only through crushing, excessive manual labor, tearing his hands apart just to buy enough bread to stay alive. One night, entirely broken in body and sick at heart, he collapsed onto his bed, sinking into the deep, heavy sleep of the desperate. And in that exhaustion, a vision appeared. A figure stood before him with a clear, absolute command. Your fortune is in Cairo. Go there and seek it. If you have a stable life, you ignore a dream like that. But if you have nothing, a promise whispered in the dark presents a terrible dilemma. Is chasing an apparition across the desert an act of profound destiny, or the ultimate sign of a broken mind grasping at straws? When your reality is unbearable, any illusion looks like a lifeline. With nothing left to lose, the man packed his meager belongings and stepped out onto the grueling road to Egypt. He survived the brutal, sun-scorched trek across the desert, arriving at the sprawling edges of Cairo just as the sun set. He was exhausted, completely broke, and highly vulnerable. With no money for an inn, he slipped through the heavy wooden doors of a local mosque, grateful just to have a quiet stone floor to sleep on. But the quiet didn't last. In the dead of night, a violent noise erupted from the house next door. Thieves had broken in. The residents woke, screaming for help, and within minutes, the chief of police and his heavily armed officers swarmed the alleyways. In the ensuing panic, the actual robbers vanished into the dark shadows of the city. The police, furious and empty-handed, stormed into the adjacent mosque and found only one person, a filthy, unknown foreigner fast asleep on the floor. They didn't ask questions. They grabbed the Baghdadi, dragged him outside, and beat him mercilessly with palm rods until he was half dead. Bleeding and confused, he was hurled into a prison cell to rot for 3 days. The promise of his vision had materialized into absolute agony. His grand leap of faith hadn't delivered a fortune, it had delivered a beating. The dream, it seemed, was a trap. On the 3rd day, the guards hauled his battered body out of the dungeon and dumped him onto the floor in front of the city's ultimate pragmatist, the chief of police. The magistrate demanded to know why a man from Baghdad was lurking in a Cairo mosque. Trembling, the prisoner offered a pathetic, completely honest confession. He crossed the known world simply because a voice in a dream told him a fortune was waiting. The chief stared at him and then erupted into booming laughter. He mocked the prisoner's little wit, utterly baffled that a grown man would subject himself to a desert crossing and a severe beating based on a nighttime hallucination. To hammer his point home, the cynical chief decided to educate the fool. He explained that he too had experienced a vivid, recurring dream. A phantom voice had spoken to him, not once, but 3 times. The voice told me there is a very specific house in Baghdad, the chief sneered. It described the architecture perfectly, a distinct walled garden with a stone fountain right in the center. And buried deep underneath that very fountain is a massive chest of gold. But did I abandon my post and run to Baghdad? No, because I am not an idiot who chases the illusions of sleep. The contrast in the room was absolute. The believer's blind faith had left him bruised and imprisoned, but the pragmatist's cynical logic had blinded him entirely to a fortune that actually existed. As the chief described the garden and the fountain, the ruined man's heart stopped. He knew every stone, every corner of that blueprint. The chief was describing the man's very own home in Baghdad. But the prisoner didn't say a word. He didn't gasp, and he certainly didn't argue. He simply bowed his head, swallowed his pride, and accepted the chief's mockery, along with a few coins of pity money to pay for his journey back. He dragged his bruised, broken body back out into the desert. With every agonizing step toward home, He walked with absolute crystalline purpose, finally possessing the specific coordinates he had traveled 1,000 miles to find. His silence in that courtroom wasn't a surrender to the chief's logic. It was the quiet, staggering realization that his entire journey had been a necessary loop. He had to cross the desert solely to acquire the one piece of information he was missing. The moment he pushed open the gates of his own neglected courtyard, he didn't rest. He grabbed a shovel and began tearing furiously into the hard earth directly beneath the fountain. His shovel struck something solid. He cleared away the dirt, pulling back the lid to reveal a blinding, life-changing hoard of gold and silver. The cynical chief's dream had been flawlessly accurate. This reveals the strange, mechanical paradox of his journey. The voice in his first dream hadn't sent him to Cairo because his fortune was buried in the Egyptian sand. He had to walk to Cairo, sneak into that distant mosque, endure the guard's brutal beating, and sit in a dungeon to hear a skeptic's mockery. Every ounce of exhaustion and violence served as the necessary price he paid to learn what sat beneath his own home. Perilous journeys often serve to provide the painful perspective required to recognize the wealth that was always in our own backyard.